Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our Finishing the Race, which is really a wonderful series of reflections. And it will continue to be interesting, I believe. It's certainly been interesting for me. I don't always mean to be so self-centered about these, but these teachings, even after all these years, these teachings are so thrilling to me that when I have the opportunity to approach it from another angle or to focus on some other aspect of it, I feel so uplifted and so privileged to have the opportunity to think it through and articulate it again. So thank you for showing enough interest that I can keep on doing this. It's the greatest blessing of my life. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow at thy feet. Help us to attune ourselves to the power of your presence, to the uplifting force of your unconditional love. Show us that we have within us that same divine power, that everything that we think of as ourselves is really just an aspect of your consciousness, that our separateness itself is the greatest delusion. We are your children. Bring us home to our divine home in thee. Om, peace. Amen. Swami calls this essay that we're working from, as I've mentioned several times, the final exam. And a final exam is generally a pretty challenging thing to take care of. A zillion years ago, during my brief school days and my even briefer college career, finals was always a big deal. Well, I can't do that because I have finals next week. And everything would have to be focused around that concept, because even that very word final, it's just like, this is the end. Everything has to come together now because it's final. So when Swami calls this the final exam, we have to be prepared for it to be happening on a very high level. This isn't just a pop quiz where we have a couple of things that maybe we'll get right or wrong. This is really going deep into the power of the Spirit and looking for the final answers in the sense of infinity. It's perfectly fine whatever happens, because all that happens is we get to take it again later. So it's not like it's final in the sense that it's going to be hell or heaven for eternity. But it's final in that it does wrap up a lot of experiences that we can remember and reflect on now. And after the incarnation ends, the details will get fuzzier. And we'll have to face whatever we have failed to face. But we might as well finish as much as we can. So the part that we're working on now, and we'll be working on for some time, has to do with whatever we might have done that has caused other people pain. And this is, of course, one of the things that we wake up in the middle of the night thinking about, is the ways, well, we think about two things. We think about the way we may have hurt others, and we think about the way others may have hurt us. And today we're going to be talking more about what we might have done that was not as kind and as compassionate as it should have been. Swami has 2 paragraphs here, and I'll read those before we talk. He says, let's see, if you remember having ever hurt anybody, or perhaps having acted unjustly toward him, mentally send him blessings, visualize him or her floating in the ocean of God bliss. And then here's another which is closely related. If ever you have spoken or acted inconsiderately toward another human being, even perhaps only in haste, recreate that scene in your mind and then ask God to bless everyone whom you may ever have hurt. Project rays of love and bliss outward from your heart to all who have ever had to bear the brunt of your anger, impatience, unkindness, or cruelty. In his own autobiography, The Path, Swamiji talks precisely about this exact experience, and he tells a few incidents from his youth about things that he did that in retrospect were not ideal. He talks about his singing teacher, an older woman who was a wonderful singing teacher to him, and we've all gotten the fruit of her training for all these years through Swami's voice. But she was a woman in her 70s, and she had never had a pupil like Swami. You can imagine that. And she said, she confessed to him after 6 or 10 months of lessons. She said, literally, I'm living for only one thing now, and that's to see you become a great singer. Now, Swamiji writes in The Path, and he writes it very poignantly. He says he never went back to her. He never saw her or spoke to her again because he did not want to be a great singer. He wanted to find truth and share truth with people. And the idea of becoming a great singer was not only unattractive to him, it was positively repugnant. Nor did he want to be the object of someone else's ambitions. He didn't want his life to be dictated by the desires and needs of someone else who did not have in mind for him the same spiritual destiny that he had in mind for himself. So he never went back to her. And the implication is he never spoke to her again. And it hurt his heart forever after, because it must have disappointed her extremely deeply to lose him as her student. And I can imagine also she enjoyed his company. I'm sure there were many aspects of it. So Swamiji speaks of her, and he mentions a few other instances. And he says the only solution he's been able to think of is that he prays for them. You know, whatever disappointment he may have caused them, he asks God to return it to them, to make it up to them in blessing many, many, many times over. We're caught, we really are caught, because at times in our lives, because of the pressures on us or ignorance or malice, whatever it might be, we just do things that we shouldn't have done. And often, you know, the clock turns, and there's just absolutely nothing we can do. You can't go back and make reparations to someone who's off the planet or whose whereabouts you have no idea where they are. You'll never be able to find them. But if we pray, Divine Mother knows who everyone is and can find their address better than Santa Claus. She knows where everyone is and can send her blessings. And now that we understand the power of God's blessings, whatever goodness we may have been able to express to that person is now magnified tremendously by the fact that we know how to pray and that we've given our lives to God. And there's many other factors that we have to put in here, which is also to have the humility to realize that even though our actions may have consequences and people may have experiences because of what we have done, we are not really the cause of anyone's destiny. Master made the very interesting statement, because we live in the dimension of time where one event seems to follow after another. He said we have the mistaken impression that one event causes the other. That's a very interesting thing to meditate upon. In other words, I say something inconsiderate, you get your feelings hurt, a whole set of consequences happens after that. It's easy to feel that I caused something to happen. But the fact of the matter is there are extraordinarily complicated, interwoven karmic threads that would never have put that person in front of you at a time when you were going to respond impatiently unless it was exactly what that soul needed for their own unfoldment. So part of the way we're able to release these moments when, without question, we failed to live up to the highest ideals, even that we might have known at the time, or that we later began to understand and began to realize how inappropriate we had been, how self-centered, how self-motivated, how uncompassionate. The list of negative adjectives is enormous. There's no point in extending it. We all know what it is. But you would never have expressed that energy toward someone unless it was absolutely necessary for them to experience it, for their own spiritual salvation. You know, this is where everything comes down to, are we part of a greater reality? Who is in charge? Is there a benign divine mother looking over everything, or am I the only force in the universe? Even when there appears to be a cause and effect relationship, even that appearance would never come into being if it wasn't God's will that it happened that way. Now, this is not a cop-out. This is actually the way we transcend, because the way we transcend is back what Swami says at the beginning of this. This is God's dream. We are participating in it, and we have a responsibility to behave as well as we can. And of course, part of how we behave well is that when we recognize our folly, we don't hide from that. We have the humility and the grace, at least inwardly, to accept it and to stand before God without any shame. But if we were 4 years old and behaved like a 4-year-old, we would have done better if we could have done better. Here's a wonderful, slightly complicated story, though, that always has helped me to understand how God has His own plan. This is the story of the Golden Buddha, which sits in this little temple in Bangkok, in Thailand. I learned this story probably in 1986, when I was on my way to India with a pilgrimage group for the first time, and we were flying Thai Airways, and part of that is we spent 2 nights in Thailand, which was very exciting and very fun for us. None of us had ever been there before. And one of the places we visited is this surprisingly, at least at that time, small and humble little shrine in which there was this enormous Buddha that was completely gold-plated. I mean, the power, the value of the object must have been really stunning. And in the humble circumstances were the beginning of our appreciation of the Eastern point of view versus the Western way of doing things. In the West, that would have had this huge multi-story cathedral built over it. And here it was in this almost an open-air little temple. Okay, so this Buddha, which is gold-plated, or gold, I don't even know if it's solid gold, it's bigger than life-size. It's quite a big item. For many, okay, you'll go back all the way to the beginning. It was created many centuries ago by some wealthy king somewhere in Thailand, I mean, many centuries ago. And then the barbarians were coming and were going to conquer his kingdom, and the king knew this. This is not myth, this is the story. So he took the Golden Buddha out of its place of honor. He had it covered in ceramic, and he just placed it by a river. So it's an outdoor ceramic statue of a Buddha, and he had it moved there and placed there so that when the barbarians came through, whoever the barbarians were at that time, and captured his kingdom, they would not capture this Golden Buddha because they would just see it as a statue out by the river and of relative unimportance. And it worked. But then that kingdom was wiped out and the conquerors never knew. And the fact of what this statue actually was just became lost in time. But it was a very nice statue. So many centuries later, coming into relatively modern times, somebody saw that statue out by the river and thought, this is not an appropriate place for this beautiful statue. It needs to be in some place better than this. So whoever this man was, this was before mechanistic ways of moving things. This would have been horse carts, or donkey carts, or bullock carts, or whatever there was in Thailand at that time. But it was a very heavy statue, and he was enough of an engineer. He figured out how to leverage it up onto this cart, how to brace it in the cart, and then he was going to pull it in to a more, maybe into the city of Bangkok, I don't know, but he was going to move it into a more suitable place where it could be honored in the way it should be. And everything was going fine for a long time, but then finally somehow he had underestimated the weights or the power or the rocky road or whatever it was. The whole thing fell over, broke the cart, hit the ground. Now, of course, the man who planned the whole thing watches all his plans collapsing like this. But when the ceramic statue hit the ground that hard, the ceramic cracked. And when the ceramic cracked, all of a sudden he's looking in and he realizes that this is not a ceramic statue, this is a golden statue. And so its extraordinary, true worth was revealed. He becomes the great hero. Whoever after is in this shrine, and all tourists like myself come in. It probably supports half the economy of Bangkok. I don't remember if they charged us money, but nonetheless, it's a marvelous thing. Then there we all are. Now, there's so many aspects to that story which you could talk about, but this is the one that I love the most. God needed someone with enough chutzpah to think he could move that statue, but not quite enough skill to actually be able to do it. And I can imagine that poor guy lying awake the night before, like, I hope this is going to work. And I always just think of the moment when the thing began to crash, which just must have gone so slowly as he watched it coming down to the ground. And he probably even heard it crack. It's just, here it is. It's just a nightmare for him, which turns out to be not a nightmare, because there was just a wholly different plan at work here. And God needed someone just like him. Now, it may be a stretch, but I don't actually think it is. Somebody's karma needs somebody to be inconsiderate and rude to them. And I need to practice being inconsiderate and rude so that years later I can lie awake at night and feel terrible about it and resolve never to do that again. And everything then rolls as it's supposed to roll. So how am I supposed to say, everything happens by God's will, except for this. This was my fault. Now, it might have been an expression of our limitation. That's the truth. And it might have been a necessary lesson. It's not like what I did was good, but what I did was necessary. And how can I cut that little square out of all of creation and say, everything is God's will except this was me? And that's how we transcend it. We don't whitewash what we did. We just do exactly what Swami says. We see that it was God always acting through us and selecting us because of our weaknesses. It was the booby prize that we got, but not really. Because of that, we learned something. It's very interesting when you really still your mind, when you can really still your mind, to see what incidences arise that actually need resolution. It's very interesting to me because I have I have more than one, but I have one very strong incident from when I was in kindergarten, or maybe even younger than kindergarten. I have one very strong incident when I was in, I believe it was the 4th grade. In kindergarten, for reasons I don't understand, I was probably the teacher's pet because I had that karma. I was clever, I was smart, I was cute, and so I was a nice kid to have in a teacher's class, and I was well behaved and all these things. And somehow or another, the details of it I don't remember, but I behaved like a stinker. That part I'm very clear about. Somehow I was a real stinker, but instead of getting punished, the teacher actually gave me privileges and allowed me to sort of dictate to the other children what they were going to do. And it's fascinating to me because I was 5. I believe it was before regular school. So I was 5 or 4, probably 5. And I remember as I sat there in this queenly way, empowered wrongly by the teacher, and acted, just like a monarch toward everyone, that it was wrong. I just knew it was wrong. I still know it was wrong, but I did it anyway. And I know I'm responsible when I meet my maker, like Dr. Ritchie met Jesus when he had his near-death experience. He was responsible for everything he did, even as a child. And that it's interesting to me. It's not, I mean, the incident is also of interest. But it's interesting to me how clearly, even, like, what is this, 70 years later, 68 years later, I vividly remember it. It was wrong. And at the time, I knew I should have said something, and I didn't. Now, I don't carry that anymore as a trauma, but I do find how interesting it is. We are responsible. And then in the 4th grade, this girl transferred into our school, and she was notorious because could it have been the 4th grade? Let me just hold this for a second. Where was I been? We must have been a little older, maybe the 6th grade, because this girl had run away with some older man. You know, she was from a very different reality than the one I had lived in, and she'd been in the newspapers and all of this. Was she kidnapped? Did she go willingly? It was just like, it was a world way beyond the world that I was used to. But it was elementary school, and the girls in the nasty popular girls in my class tricked this girl and caused her to break a school rule and go off campus when she wasn't supposed to go off campus. But they tricked her. And then she got called on the carpet, and I actually believe she got expelled from our school because she'd gotten in trouble. But those girls had tricked her. And once again, I was standing there, and I didn't have the nerve to stand up and say, wait a minute, this is not right. I just let it pass. It wasn't so much directed at me, but I let it pass. You know, these are real moments. These things cling in our mind, and that one I carried for a really long time because I felt personally responsible for the fact that this woman, this girl, you know, was once again going to be in turmoil. She had the karma to be in turmoil. But that's what I finally realized. I had failed, and failed badly. But she had the karma to be in turmoil. If those girls hadn't tricked her, it would have been another day or two, because she was heading off to where she was heading off. So I asked Master to bless her. I asked Master to bless her over and over again. But I still remember the incident. But what is the lesson for me? Have the courage in both cases. You know, oh look, I think I'm so strong. But in both cases, I just bowed to my own fears or pleasures and just took what I wanted at someone else's expense. We all carry it. We all carry it. We all carry it. Swami, that's why he took the trouble in the path. You know, the path is like the autobiography in that sense, which is, there are countless examples of Swami's life or Master's life he could have drawn on, but he drew very specific instances because of their universal application. Swami's story and Master's story, of course, they're not about them as individuals. They're about the journey of a soul and the experiences that soul can go through. And, you know, the past lives of all men are dark with many shames. But divine freedom doesn't come from sinking into the darkness of those mistakes because God is the doer. And we're always acting out the divine plan in one way or another. And if today I am the perpetrator of injustice, tomorrow I'll be the victim of injustice. And that's the way it works until we free ourselves completely. We untie the fundamental knot. And this is what we have to deeply understand. It isn't a question of that, you know, in my elementary school, exactly that woman, or in my kindergarten class, exactly those children. It's the mistake I have in my mind that I am not part of a greater reality, that my ego is actually the determining force instead of the power of God flowing through me. Now understand, the power of God flows through me in an erroneous way to awaken me to the truth. So, but even then, it's God's gift. It's God's gift that for all these years, I can still think about those two instances with a sense of never again. I'll never allow myself again, if I can possibly manage, to violate divine principles that I'm fully conscious of. But I'm sure that my determination in that way would be less powerful if I didn't have what you would call the very painful memory of having violated those principles. How do we learn the importance of these principles? Unfortunately, we learn them by violating them first and suffering the agonies of conscience that follow after that. So, was it a mistake for me to set myself up to the point where the lesson would be made very clear to me? How could that be a mistake? Because how else would I ever learn? How else would the seed become a sapling, become a tree, become a fruit-bearing tree that can feed multitudes, except step by step? And so as we reflect, as Swami suggests, any person I may have hurt, any person that I've even been inconsiderate to, treated unjustly, let me very deeply accept the experience, the negative experience, so that it will provide the absolute incentive not to repeat it again. And in the meantime, Divine Mother, bless all of those I may have hurt. Compensate them beyond whatever little hurt they may have experienced. Shower them with blessings so that through their suffering, if I were to have caused it, they too will find the great joy of divine presence. God bless you.